All right, hello once again, Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and as part of the Rankin Technical College AWD 1000 Web Development Technologies course, I've been going through and creating a series of video presentations based on the Mozilla Developer Network series of documents on learning web development. I am in the CSS section, Building Blocks module, and I'm talking about overflowing content. As mentioned there, overflowing is what happens when there's too much content to fit in a container. So what do? You can add scroll bars, you can just say to truncate it, all right, etc. You can hide it. There's a lot of different things that you can do. Now remember, as mentioned here, everything in CSS is in a box. So you can constrain the size of these boxes, and you do by setting heights and widths. Overflow is what happens when there's too much content to fit in that box. As mentioned here, CSS provides various tools that you can use to manage overflow. All right. So it says here, let's consider two examples that demonstrate the default behavior. All right. The first one, the box has been restricted by setting a height. So you've got this height set to here, but what do you do? What can you do? You can either make it higher, or you could cut down the size of text, all right? Or you could try to handle it some other way, but those are probably the two, at least for me, that come to mind. The second example, as it says, is a word in a box. The box has been made too small to hold the word, so it breaks. In this case, it breaks out of the box. Now, it says here, you might wonder why CSS works in such a messy way. Why not just hide it? Why not scale it? It says whenever possible, or wherever possible, CSS does not hide content. You never know what it is you're going to be hiding and where something is going to be cut off. And it says the problem there with losing data, or this data loss that they mention, is you might not notice it. Your website visitors might not notice it. There might be something that they are expected to fill out and it's being hidden so they don't see it. As it says, if a submit button on a form disappears and you can't complete the form, what are you going to do? So rather, CSS overflows in visible ways. As it says, you're more likely to see there's a problem, and at worst case, the site visitor will let you know that there's a problem. All right, if you restrict the box with width or height, CSS trusts that you know what you're doing. Always a bad thing to assume somebody knows what they're doing, right? CSS assumes that you're managing overflow on your own. All right, so the next two lessons, as explained there, they're going to show you two different approaches to control sizing in ways so you don't want it to happen to begin with, in other words, if at all possible, at least. So the overflow property, as mentioned, is how you take control of the overflow. That should make sense, right? So in this first case here, they've set overflow to hidden. Now, again, this can be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on where it's cut off. In this case, you can kind of tell you've got more content than you do room. But that's not necessarily always going to be the case. So maybe it's better to add scroll bars. So if you say overflow scroll instead of overflow hidden, as it says, browsers with visible scroll bars will always display them, even when there's not enough content to show. So you can go down here, or you can go over here if that's the case, but in this case, you'd just be going down. Now notice it says remove some of the content from the box below. So let's remove most of it here. Oh, I thought it would let us. It says notice the scroll bars remain even if there's no need for scrolling. All right. that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, it's like the lesser of two evils. At least with having the scroll bars there, if you do need them, you've got them. All right. And if you don't need them, well, it looks kind of ugly, but at least it's better than needing them and not having them. All right. It says in the example below, we only need to scroll on the y-axis, but if you want to scroll on the y-axis, it says you could use just the overflow y. Okay. You can also scroll on the x-axis using an overflow x. It says, although this is not the recommended way to accommodate long words. All right, if you've got a long word in a small box, you might want to consider the word break, overflow wrap, or you might even want to consider not using a box. So there's a lot of different ways that you can at least attempt to handle this stuff. Now, much of this information that you're seeing in here, all right, is with stuff, just so you know, that I've dealt with little to not at all. All right. Okay, you can specify X and Y scrolling using the overflow property passing two values. All right, so in other words, you could scroll both ways too if you needed to. All right. Overflow establishes a block formatting context. As mentioned there, when you use the value of overflow, you are creating a BFC or block formatting context. The content of the box that you have changed the value of overflow for acquires a self-contained layout. Content cannot poke outside the layer, cannot poke into it, and nothing can poke out of that content or that container into the surrounding area, which typically would probably be what you'd want. All right, hold on just one sec. All right. Unwanted overflow in web design. As it says, modern layout methods help you manage overflow. They largely work without assumptions and dependencies over how much content there will be on a page. This was not always the norm, but again, over time, stuff has changed. You know, I've mentioned this before that in the past, most of the web was textual in nature. Now, I don't know what the exact percentages are, but much of the stuff that's in here, rather than being text only, there's a lot more images and the like today than there used to be. Okay, but the bottom line is this: when developing a site, always keep overflow in mind. Test designs with large and small amounts of content, increase font sizes, etc. Try to come up with different ways that somebody can look at. You know, again, much better that you break your system than to have somebody else break it. All right, that's about it on overflow. So when we come back, we'll talk about values and units next. Okay, just a few.